Hello and welcome to the Center for LGBTQ and Gender Studies in Religion. My name is Bernie Schlager and I serve as Executive Director here at the Center at Pacific School of Religion in Berkeley. And we welcome you to the second in our five-part series, Queering the 2024 Vote. Today we have Reverend Jakob Hero Shaw speaking on elections are a queer thing, and with a focus especially on work and ministry within congregations. As the nation prepares to head to the polls in not that many days, how do we discuss the important political issues that impact our communities? And in this CLGS Queering the Vote workshop, we will explore the upcoming presidential election, discuss what can and cannot be said in our faith communities, and also examine the unique spiritual needs that queer congregants are facing as the election approaches. Before I introduce Jakob more fully, just some housekeeping details. This is being live streamed and recorded for later posting on our socials here at CLGS. We will not record or post the chat feature, which is open. And let's see, we often get requests from people to turn off blurry backgrounds. So if you don't mind doing that, it causes vision and migraine problems for some people. So welcome again, and let me more fully introduce my colleague here at the Center, the Reverend Jakob Hero Shaw. Jakob is the coordinator of our Transgender Roundtable at the Center for LGBTQ and Gender Studies here at Berkeley, and he's a faculty member of the Trans Religious Leadership Cohort. Jakob is senior pastor of Metropolitan Community of Church of Tampa in Florida, where they have battened down the hatches for a hurricane that begins with the letter H, but I can't remember. But Jacob's told me it's not beginning with an I, which people believe is more ominous. So Jakob received his Master of Divinity degree and certificate in Sexuality and Religion from Pacific School of Religion, as well as a Master of Arts degree in Ethics and Social Theory from the Graduate Theological Union. Jacob's greatest joy is raising two amazing kids, Mima and Ruben, with his husband, Alan. So with no further ado, let me turn it over to Jakob. And again, welcome to CLGS, everyone. We're grateful and happy to have you here with us.
Thank you. Well, although I know that my daughter would never watch this, her name is pronounced Mima, and she's very particular about it, as we all are. So
as she should be.
As she should be. Hello, everyone. I'm so happy to see your faces. And so I'm going to share my screen and we're just going to get started. All right. So it comes as no surprise to anyone that we are fast approaching election time. So as we do that, I want us to consider, those of us especially who are leading in faith communities, although this is open to everyone, and I think that there will be something for you even if you're not leading it in a religious community, what it is that we are facing here. So as we get started, I want to invite you to put in the chat where you are, and what brings you to this workshop. We don't have a huge number of people, so yeah, just go ahead and drop in the chat your city. As Bernie said, I am here in Tampa, Florida, where we are preparing for a hurricane. I'm on Seminole and Tocobaga land, and what brings me to this workshop, I approached Bernie several months ago and said that I wanted to have a conversation with faith leaders about the election as the election approaches. All right. Well, as people are putting their, hi, Barbara. As you're putting your answer of where you are and what brings you to this workshop, we'll move on to our next slide. So, how are you feeling about the upcoming election? Are you excited? Are you enthusiastic? Are you concerned? Feel free to unmute if you want to share your thoughts.
Well, I'll say something.
Yeah.
I've been a lifelong, mostly Democrat, and I want Harris to win, and I don't know if she will or not, but I've been through a lot of right and left swings over the years, from Reagan to Bush to back and forth, all the way through. So, I want to be optimistic, but I also know that no matter what happens, we will persist, even though this seems horrible. Also, Reagan seemed horrible. Also, Bush seemed horrible. So I'm just trying to not lose my mind about the whole thing. And in terms of church, I'm in a liberal church in a California way, like a UCC church, but it really is almost half Republican, half Democrat. So as they would say, we're fiscal conservatives, not social conservatives. But it makes it. I still feel the tension, and I'm not quite sure what to say or how to say it sometimes, or rather than say anything at all.
Yeah. That's one of the things that is really challenging is if you're serving a congregation that has mixed views. I mean, I think most of us who are in congregations will find that there are a variety of political viewpoints. So there's that balance of like not wanting to alienate people, but also wanting to speak your truth and your reality of what you think is, the way that we would like to steer our congregation.
And I would echo what I saw Grace putting in the chat there is I'm really worried about violence on election day and the weeks afterwards. How will the vote be slowed down? How will it be miscounted? How will things be thrown into the machinery to prevent a free and fair election?
Yeah, thank you, Bernie. I'm really worried about the possibility of needing the Supreme Court to call the election. That is terrifying.
Yeah, I agree with you on that. So, not to start us off on such a heavy space, but that is the reality of it, is that, as we're talking about how we feel about the election, I would say that it's probably safe to say that most of us are not feeling fantastic. And, this, for me, I've been serving my church for 9 years. So this is my third time around with a presidential election. And Trump has been the candidate for the Republicans each time. So I kind of feel like, especially after what we saw last time, that we maybe are anticipating some of the things that might be happening. So let's talk about some of the logistics. What are we not allowed to say? Do you feel that you have a clear view on what it is that you are able to say in your congregations, what you're not able to say. Are you scared of getting in trouble with the IRS? That kind of thing. And I'm going to, let's see, if I do this, we can see each other, I think, right? Can you see each other? All right. Do you feel that you have a good sense of that, of you know, what is safe to talk about politically and what isn't? I'm going to show you some stuff from the IRS in a minute, but I'm just curious where people feel that their knowledge is. Like, do you feel like you're totally informed on what's safe to say, or no? Personally, before looking it up, I thought I knew for sure, and you know, I feel like I was somewhat accurate in my understanding, and I don't think I've broken any rules yet.
I think some of
Anyone
it
else?
in
Yeah, go ahead.
the chat that we can't call out people by name, that we can call out parties by name, that we can't make any recommendations. I don't know how it is with like when we kind of in a veiled way still do that. But I'm thinking you're going to talk about that.
All right. Since the last time I led one of these, Zoom did an update, and I'm like, all my buttons are different. So, all right.
Can I add one dynamic to it? I know we're talking about the presidential election and what's legal and not legal. But when I first saw the screen, my first thought was, oh my God, I'm having a horrible time talking about Israel and Palestine in terms of, and I know that it's not the issue, but I'm just saying as a pastor and as a preacher, it feels like a weekly nightmare. So many ways to say the wrong thing, so few ways to say the right thing. And I feel it's as important an issue interrelated to the presidential election as the other.
Absolutely. So let's talk about that. And I 100% agree with you. Like, I am so worried about saying the wrong thing that I often avoid Israel, Palestine, other topics as well. And yeah, obviously that was more about this upcoming election, but in politics in general. So my context is that, like some other folks here, I'm pastoring in an MCC church. So my congregation is mostly LGBT identified, and if they aren't LGBTQ, then they're definitely allies. So around those issues, personally, in my congregation, I don't have a problem. It is safe to say that anything involving queer folks is safe territory to talk about. But when we branch out from that, one of the things that came up, one of the first really big ones that came up was when Roe v. Wade was overturned. And suddenly I was so surprised because I had absolutely made the assumption that everyone in my congregation would be pro-choice. It's not a topic that had really had an opportunity to come up very much, because just to be real, there have, as far as I know, not been any unexpected pregnancies in my congregation. It's an older crowd. It's mostly folks who are not doing the kinds of things that can get a person pregnant. Not everyone falls into that category, but the majority. So yeah, I was surprised by that. And now, you know, for the last year especially, you know, we're struggling with how to talk about Israel and Palestine before this past year, but especially since October 7th of last year. What are you finding in your faith communities? What are you finding that's helpful in having these difficult conversations? Are you finding that people are mostly silent about it? Jim, are you preaching about? Oh, I saw.
So, you know,
something.
I come from an MCC background, and now I'm working in the UCC. And I felt, this is an observation, but I felt a lot more freedom in MCC to talk about issues than I do in the UCC,
Mhm.
especially if they're reproductive choice or LGBT or anything really. So
Mhm.
now that I think about it, so I'm kind of trying to figure out how to navigate that. Those of you who know me know I'm pretty outspoken, so I have tried to raise issues of around immigration, separate from
Mhm.
naming Biden. I've tried to find out ways to talk about uh, reproductive justice stuff, and the UCC is pro-choice, but you know, you don't have to scratch too far to find diversity of opinion there. So I do try
Mhm.
to keep it off personalities, and I try to root it whenever possible in UCC positions: pro-choice, LGBT, immigration, Israel, Palestine. But it's not unusual for the national church to be more liberal than the congregations.
Mhm.
So I'm trying to explore that tension. The national church is more liberal, and we're congregationalists, so congregation can have weird microcultures and still be UCC. So I don't know if any of
Mhm.
that's helpful, but I have tried to
Yeah.
use the UCC brand as a way to bring into conversation positions on issues and then steer away from naming a politician.
Daniel.
Yeah, thank you. One of the things that I've actually been trying to do is as MCC San Francisco being a queer church, very much trying to talk about, individual autonomy, which covers, the stuff that's going on with the gender affirming healthcare as well as the abortion rights. And in this last week I preached about what's going on in Springfield. I talked about that as far as just the not being in alignment with the teachings of Jesus, as far as and also mentioned white Christian nationalist. And that was because of the lecture that I attended last week through Christian Century and faith and our democracy and faith and democracy. And that was, for me, that was something I've gotten a little bit of feedback early on when I started from one particular person about not talking about the ceasefire often enough. And I have not seen them come around. They're intermittently attending our church, and I've not seen them in a while. And I did mention it. I did mention it this past week. I've not gotten any pushback one way or the other, but I've also heard some people comment about that they don't want to hear too much about politics.
Mm.
And nothing is specific, but just that we don't want to hear too much about politics. So I'm trying to bring a positive message of hope, as well as pointing out, things that we're seeing that are not in alignment with the teachings of Jesus, which aligns with the values of the church.
So going back to our question of what we're not allowed to say, there's a few different levels of what we're allowed and not allowed to say. There's what we're not allowed to say in the culture of our community, and there's what we're not allowed to say because of losing tax exempt status. Bob, I see you have your hand up.
Yeah,
Go
it
ahead.
took a minute to find my raise hand function. I've been in what's now called the LGBTQ movement in the church it's approaching 50 years. And I'm increasingly frustrated by so many topics and discussions being labeled as political. Like
Yeah.
if I come out as gay, that's political. It's not personal, it's political. And it's a change in the culture that I found very, very distressing.
Yeah. And I think often people label political as anything that makes them uncomfortable. Sometimes I think we talk about social justice issues and then get told that we've gotten too political, when the reality is that, you know, faith communities are pretty called to do those, talk about those things. So let's explore for a minute what might get us into trouble.
I
So
think
here's what the
Michael's
IRS
hand,
says.
Jacob, I think
Oh.
Michael's hand might have gone up. Michael, did you raise your hand or were you?
I did have my hand up. So one of the things I wanted to add as far as not being able to talk about is from what I've been, is that we're not allowed to really talk about to anybody in church. I mean, not just from the pulpit, but you can't be an earshot talking to someone who might be able to certain political leaning about the you know, that's how safe they want to be around it. And of course, whenever we're out in public, we have to be ourselves and not represent the church.
I'm still playing with trying to figure out how to, for some reason, when it's in full screen, I can't see any of you. So I apologize if I don't see you raise your hand. All right, so here's what the IRS says for all of us 501c3 organizations. We are absolutely prohibited from directly or indirectly participating in or intervening in any political campaign on behalf of or in opposition to any candidate for elective public office. Contributions to political campaign funds or public statements of position, verbal or written, made on behalf of the organization in favor of or in opposition to any candidate for public office clearly violate the prohibition against political campaign activity. Violating this prohibition may result in denial or revocation of tax exempt status and the imposition of certain excise taxes. It also says certain activities or expenditures may not be prohibited depending on the facts and circumstances. For example, certain voter education activities, including presenting public forums and publishing voter education guides conducted in a nonpartisan manner, do not constitute prohibited political campaign activity. In addition, other activities intended to encourage people to participate in the electoral process, such as voter registration and get out the vote drives, would not be prohibited political campaign activity if conducted in a nonpartisan manner. So, so we can't. Oh, I see you raising your hand, Bernie. Yes.
My very yellow hand there. I had a question kind of bouncing off what Jim had said earlier about being in the UCC. I remember it many times, right, around marriage equality and freedom of choice, et cetera, et cetera. Some Roman Catholic dioceses were spending enormous amounts of money doing mailings, but also placing in pews voter guides. So I'm reading what you just had on there, I guess. Placing, say, a UCC voter guide around issues of choice or around immigration is okay, right? As long as you don't talk.
Not exactly. So I actually just talked with the League of Women Voters about this. So, you know, they're a more progressive organization, but they are a 501c3 and put out voter guides. The way that they do it is that instead of saying we endorse this, they have they just publish what the candidates have said. And so but in a really clear way so that you already know without them endorsing one or the other what what the views are that matter to you. So in Florida, you know, we have one of the things on the ballot is around abortion. So, you know, their voter guide will say very clearly, one candidate is going to be more supportive than the other, and for local candidates as well. And they just use their own quotes. So I mean, you know, some organizations that are 501c4, they're not tax exempt. They can endorse candidates. Let me see what's in the chat here. So Barbara asked, do these rules apply only to paid employees of the church and specific church sponsored activities, or do they apply to anyone like volunteers on the church property? That's a great question. So really anyone who is in any capacity speaking for a church. Now, I'm not an expert, so definitely check with the, you know, I'm not giving legal advice here, but my understanding is that anyone, even down to, I have been instructed before by MCC to encourage our board members to not wear political t-shirts and things, just in case, so that doesn't get misconstrued. I mean, personally, as a pastor, what I do is when I post anything that could be seen as political, I usually, like on social media, I put something on it that says, these are my views. I'm not speaking for anyone but myself, as both an employee of CLGS and as an employee of my church. So just to be extra careful. But yeah, I don't think that whether the person's paid or not matters. It's anyone who seems empowered to speak for the church. The other thing is that sometimes, you know, one really important thing that faith communities can do is register people to vote. And there's nothing wrong with any nonprofit, faith community or otherwise, registering people to vote. Again, as long as it's done in a nonpartisan way. So it's not register to vote here so that you can vote for Harris. Register to vote here so that you can vote for Trump. I'm going to just make an assumption that most of the people here are not registering people so that they'll vote for Trump, but I could be wrong because I don't know all of you. But you know, it is when you're just getting people registered, then that's a nonpartisan thing. Any other kind of questions or experiences that you've had around these IRS rules? Anyone ever gotten a slap on the wrist or gotten into trouble or gotten a letter saying, stop it? No. I mean,
Not yet.
Not yet. Yeah. I witness all the time. I mean, this could just be some sort of confirmation bias or something, but I feel like there are very vocal conservative pastors who are not getting into trouble at all. And I think I have a fear that the more left-leaning folks are the ones who are going to get into trouble. But that could just be my own phobia because of how I personally am oriented politically. But I definitely have had a lot of times that congregants have come up to me and said that they thought I was being too political. But again, you know, like Bob was saying, and others, that, you know, sometimes they do that if we're just talking about who we are or something. The idea of what's political and what isn't is definitely a gray area. But I think, you know, we can really in our teaching and in our talking convey education on the importance of an election and even the direction that we think folks maybe should vote without endorsing any candidates or even speaking specifically about the ballot initiatives. Because when we're teaching and preaching about ethics and morality and the beliefs of our community, and we're talking about things even like nonviolence, you know, I just did I did an 8-week series on Dr. King that just finished up a couple weeks ago. And, you know, that was political. It had to be, but it was not about the election. But anyone paying attention would have understood it to be very much something that was preparing our hearts and minds for election season, without a doubt. And that's because without even mentioning candidates or what's going to be on the ballot, you know, I was talking about these ideas around justice. Yes, Daniel.
Thank you for mentioning the Share the Dream series, Jacob, because my church was also one of the ones that was doing that series at the same time, and it was very much about the political message of and the values, the core values of Martin Luther King Jr. and the movement of social justice, and that was all very political, but it wasn't about specific candidates, but it was also, as you said, preparing us for the conversations and understanding about what's going on with the election. And that was something that very much, you know, was wonderful to talk about that. And then having also the Bible book study for folks to talk about more specifically about that stuff in that context and looking at stuff each week. Yeah, I think that was really helpful. And I thought it was really good timing to prepare us for where we are right now.
Yeah, it was good. If anyone wants the resources to do this, it's a program that a few of us created. Many of them are on in this meeting. That is based on a book called Share the Dream, but it's a whole sermon series, Bible study kind of thing. So feel free to contact me through CLGS, and I will hook you up with those resources. All right. Oh, good. I fixed it now, so I can see you and see my screen. Yay. Nothing like tech issues on the fly. All right. So inspiring faith communities to vote while not getting into trouble. As I already said, and we're getting down to the wire. There's only a couple of weeks left to register to vote, but we absolutely can register people to vote. And don't let anybody convince you otherwise, because you absolutely can do that. Oh yeah, thank you. Bernie dropped my email address in the chat, so feel free to shoot me an email and I will send you those resources. Or, you know, email me about something else. So here are some options. One is as I mentioned before, we've worked with the League of Women Voters, but there are also opportunities in other organizations to get somebody out to, and it really depends on where you are, who's registering people to vote in your area. Just doing some Googling can do quite a lot, actually. Jim, I think, just shared something about, here's a local event for getting, it's a voter education event. Cool, thank you, Jim. But you can absolutely help people get registered to vote. That is important. Speaking about the election is important, with, again, as we've already talked about, being careful to not get yourself into trouble. But I would say that those of us who are faith leaders, I think we have a moral obligation to help our people figure out how to get to the polls, and inspire the community to want to vote. I'll admit that the people in my congregation who I know are going to vote differently than me, well, I will help them get to the polls too. But you know, that's a reality. And like I was saying before, as we share our morals and our ethics and open up the hearts of our congregation, I think that helps us in getting people to decide that it's important to vote. All right, so now this is more of the spiritual side of things, and this is where my heart is in all of this. We've talked about the logistics, but what I'm also really interested in is how do we hold space? So let's go back in time in our minds to 4 years ago when we were having a presidential election. I know there have been many important elections since then. Last presidential election, we were all still, you know, distancing and all of that. One of the things that my church did was we partnered with another MCC church in the area, and we did an online event that was a prayer, just a prayer for peace, prayer vigil kind of thing, instead of just sitting and watching the election results trickling in. We had an hour-long thing that people could tune into. I don't have anything like that planned this time around, although I do think it was powerful to do. But I'm interested in hearing from you. How are some ways that you're holding space? I will say the reason that, you know, I felt like in that moment, in 2020, that was a time that we could capture people's attention differently. I decided not to do it this time because I just felt like the energy was too scattered. And I didn't think that the amount of effort going into a prayer vigil would benefit enough where we can just offer prayers without having an event that people come to or tune into online. But what are some of the things your congregations are doing? Is there anything that you're thinking about doing as we're a few weeks away?
I mean, I wonder about just preemptively offering to have a time of prayer, have the church open, either, I don't know, election night, the Sunday night or the Friday night after the election when there are more results known. I realize this is more about the aftermath, but maybe just planning to have that space and not in a church service where people can come, light candles, I don't know, sing, and then maybe even have discussion as part of it. Light candles from 6 to 7, discussion at 7 o'clock. I don't know, something like that. I mean, I hadn't really thought it through very far, but until just now when you said that. But why wait till we're reading the paper or watching MSNBC or whatever we watch on Tuesday night to go, oh, I wish we had planned to do something. Because no matter what happens, it seems to me that the marker that is significant right now is that we appear to be more or less evenly divided. Right. So there's going to, it doesn't, of course, I believe the outcome matters, but I'm trying to think, well, or how does it matter?
Yeah. And now that you're saying that, I'm actually rethinking my idea of not, I mean, what we did last time was like a scripted thing because it was only on YouTube. It wasn't an in-person event. But this time, with it being an in-person event, I'm kind of picturing an intimate drop-in prayer space, kind of like a Taizé service for those who have done those, you know, with a kind of a calm energy in the space, and people could just come in and you know, get off work, go to the polls, and then come to church. That's a possibility. But we definitely won't know. Well, I can't say definitely. I would say it is highly unlikely. It will probably be several days, if not weeks, as we've seen in previous elections. And then the other piece is, what I'm finding is that I have a lot of conversations both with my congregants and with other people in the community where people are just scared. I've done some weddings recently of people who kind of rush to get their wedding together just in case something happens and suddenly marriage equality, something happens to marriage equality. I don't see that happening urgently, but it's more, what I'm more interested in is the fear that people have and the kind of sense of despair that some people are living in, many of us are living in, myself included, of what could come next. So how do we hold that space? I mean, any of us who went through CPE or have worked as chaplains definitely know that it's not about cheering people up, right? Wow, I don't know if you all can hear this thunder outside where I am, but we've got like a hurricane happening outside.
Are you safe?
Oh yeah, it's fine.
Okay.
It's just all of a sudden the storm got heavier outside.
Well, one of the things is this next weekend, this October 6th, is the Castro Street Fair in San Francisco. And we are having my church is having a booth. And one of the things we're going to be doing is, and actually this kind of gives me a little bit more focus to help focus for folks, is we're going to have this mesh panel that people are going to be able to tie on, not prayer requests, but prayer intentions. And I think maybe we can do is maybe we can ask them to maybe prayers of peace or intentions for this election, and just for general peace throughout the world. But that could also, so that's one of the things we're doing as far as is that asking people for their prayer intentions for our community, for our country, for the world. And thank you for mentioning about the doing the after the election night possible Tizay service, because we do a Wednesday night candlelight service every Wednesday, which is the day after election day. So maybe that one will pose it as a being open, maybe being open longer, and actually maybe even doing a little bit more promoting of it for folks to come as a place to find refuge and light a candle or three and listen to some music. And at that point, we will hopefully have our new music director. So they'll actually have in-person live music. So thank you for that suggestion.
How do you distinguish a prayer intention from a prayer request?
Well, for what we're doing as prayer requests is things that people would want to have prayers for themselves. We actually have a separate container that they're going to write their prayer request that we're actually going to take back to the church and we're going to pray over during a Wednesday night service. Whereas the prayer intentions is specifically what are your hopes, your dreams, your intentions, your prayers for our community, for another person, for our country, for the world. So it's an external, it's kind of an external thing that I'm putting out my good intentions or my prayers for you or for this community versus I need you to pray for me or pray for my mother or pray for, my partner's surgery is going to happen next week, those kinds of things.
Right. That makes sense. Nice. I like that idea. So we touched on this already, but I really, really want to name that it is not political to call out injustice, racism, sexism, homophobia, transphobia, and the others, right? Don't let your congregants bully you into thinking that this is being political. Now, yes, you could get in trouble if you stood up there and said, Donald Trump is a big racist, sexist, homophobic, transphobe, right? You could get in trouble for that, definitely. But you know, the example of calling out the lies that are being told about the immigrant community in Springfield eating pets. Well, I don't think a person, again, like I said, I'm not an attorney, I'm not an IRS expert, you know, but I think that's calling out injustice. That's not calling out a candidate. Now, personally, what I do is I don't say candidates' names, even though it's obvious, and anybody who talks to me is going to totally know who I'm voting for. But we have to call out the injustice. That's a fundamental piece of being religious leaders. And when we hear racist and sexist and homophobic and transphobic and all the other pieces, we have to speak out about it and do so with care. But the other thing is oh, I see. Daniel said he didn't mention who was saying the thing about immigrants. Yeah, absolutely. And recognizing that the way that the way that these isms land on people in our communities is going to be different for each person. So there's a real spiritual care need that comes up that we might not always, we can't assume how people are feeling, but we can open up conversations with, you know, those open-ended questions that we all learned about in seminary, of, you know, how find out how the people in our community are feeling. I would say making, for those who are leading faith communities, making yourself more available and more easily available for spiritual care in this time is also helpful. So I'll give the example of what I do. I use Calendly, but there are plenty of similar programs. So whichever program works for you. But basically, it's a program where you can just put a schedule out there of when you know you're available. You connect it to your calendar. So if you put in an appointment, no one else can book that time. And I just have a link that's in the newsletter, it's in the bulletin, it's on posters around the church with a QR code. And people can go to that link and they can schedule on the times that I've already set up when they might want to meet with me. And in times like this, when I feel like there's more tension and more people who might need care, I remind them more often that that link is always available. So that even if they don't want to use it, they know the pastor's there. The pastor's available, because especially I pastor a pretty small church with a very small staff. So I'm not in the office a lot. I work from home 2 days a week and from church 3 days a week. So, and then, well, really, I work all the time. You know, pastoring fills up all the time that exists, but I'm reachable. But I'm not always in the building. So whereas a generation ago, people would have dropped in to talk to the pastor, that's not an option. So there's a different way that they can contact me. So I highly recommend some kind of system where I really believe that even if they don't use it, that people feel comforted knowing that they can reach us. All right, I know we're getting down to the last few minutes here. Leading congregations with differing political views. I used to have a lot more diversity in my congregation around political views. We have a lot of diversity in other ways, but I will say that in the pandemic time and in the time when we started really talking about racial equity, which was always a factor in my congregation, but I'll say in 2020 there was more from then on. A lot of people did leave, people who didn't want to hear about racial justice and racial equity left. You might be in a congregation where people struggle around LGBT inclusion, or let's be real, the T part of the LGBT inclusion. That's even a thing in MCC churches. If you can lead a congregation where people have differing political views, then you're probably a far more tactful faith leader than I am. I didn't kick anyone out, but there were people who said, if you don't stop talking about racial justice, I'm going to leave. And I did say, well, it's fine. It's actually good to discern if a congregation is not the place for you to be. That's healthy. And the reality is that every congregation, no matter what type of congregation it is going to have people with different views. So how do we take care of our congregants beyond the helping them discern that maybe this isn't the right place for them? Sometimes that's not the best option. So I think holding the reality that we don't know who our people are actually voting for. We don't know what else on the ballot that they're going to feel differently than we feel. And, you know, our people are our people, and we are going to need to care for them. Does anyone have anything in particular that you're wrestling with on this, or that you wanted to lift up in terms of?
You know, I've been thinking about, why was it at some times in my pastoral history, the congregations I served didn't care what the laws said.
Mm-hmm.
And so, like, a conversation like this, well, you can't say that because it's against the law. You need to know the rules. I'm not saying we shouldn't know the rules. I'm not saying we shouldn't know the laws. And there was a time when we said that we would not submit to being segregated by HIV status and put, you know, and this is in 1986 in San Francisco, in California, right? And we said, that law passes, we're going to break it. And, or when during AIDS, when we gave out marijuana, totally against the law, totally wrong. Congregation was totally into it. Why? What is it that evokes that kind of commitment and passion? And I'm not talking about breaking the law for breaking the law's sake, but there are people right now whose lives are as threatened by, say, mass deportation as congregants in, say, many of the churches represented here were during HIV. How can we get our people to care more about what's happening politically than about the rules? Like, why can't they be upset? Not if I call out JD Vance, which I did on Sunday, for what he said about Haitians and HIV. Why aren't they upset about what he said about Haitians? You know, why is the other rule somehow more important? So this is what I'm wondering right now. How do we make the connections that make people willing to take risks and be engaged? Because they don't feel, everything feels very passive and complacent right now.
Yeah, maybe there's a hopeless piece of it that makes civil disobedience just not seem.
Are the consequences different?
I wonder if it has to do with the dissemination of information, how that has changed so much since that time period as well, which connects to the consequences. It's like now, no matter what it is that you say or do in your congregation, it can and most likely will be broadcast on the internet. Then again, when Matulski was giving out weed, and it was in the BAR, the Bay Area Reporter, and all the other papers that that, you know, the marijuana church, you know, that was the information was getting out about that too. For those who don't know, he was quite the controversial rock star pastor in those days, and still is.
But you know what? I was able to do what I did because the congregation was worked up. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, how do we change the paradigm of, like, minister is the one who speaks out on social justice and sermons. That's what I feel like I've defaulted to in my old age, rather than how can I see my role as the one who inspires the congregation to greater social engagement or political engagement. I mean, I'm asking myself this question. I'm just posing it. It isn't about what we can get away with or what we can do. It's what are we helping them to do, partly. Does that make sense?
I
Yeah.
also wonder, Jim, that, you know, at the time, I mean, people were engaged because it was also about them, and it was about the people we knew, and it was about the people that we were, you know, losing, that needed help. So I wonder if you get more engagement when it's really about, you know, about you or about the people that you care for. The other thing, and I really appreciate this conversation, Jacob, is I'm just struck by the difficulties even we have in talking about these issues, and how it feels like, how did we all get to be so silenced on this, or not being able to formulate our thought? And I think it's part of what massive fear and trauma does. It kind of scatters, and it prevents the ability of people to really kind of focus or think through things. Or so I think what I'm going to do in November is do 3 Sundays around keeping our voice and speaking up. What do we want to hold on to? What do we want to see? What, right? So that what is the language that we can use? And I may just use myself as an example in that. It's like just the being so distraught over everything that's happening in the world. I don't even know where to start, but that's true for the congregation as well. So where do we find an end? Where do we find our voice in the midst of all of that? But I feel like we somehow need to narrow some things down and find a way to start speaking again, and speaking loudly about issues that matter. It's like, you know, my partner's African American. She's like, you know, what's the most democratic country that we can move to if Trump wins? It's like, but for her, it's very close to her skin about what's going to happen if Trump wins. It's like there's a lot at stake, and we ought to be able to say a lot, and yet we don't know what to. I mean, there's such a disconnect for me there. I'm talking about the top of my head. I'm not making a whole lot of sense.
No, you're absolutely making sense, and it connects to actually this slide. So, pre-offended is a term that I've been using recently, that I came up with, which means, you know, those people that show up ready to be mad, ready to be offended, ready to be upset with whatever you're going to say, and we still have to provide spiritual care to the pre-offended. I think that connects a little bit to what you were saying, Elizabeth, because that the sense of, I don't know, that sense of inability to have community connects to the pre-offended. Not saying that you are pre-offended or that your partner is. I'm saying that there are so many people who in our communities are like, well, there's that, you know, I'll use myself as an example. People know that I'm super liberal, right? They expect, some people, not a lot, but some people in my congregation expect that I'm going to offend them. You know, there have been times that I have literally just been quoting scripture, like quoting from the Gospels, and people say you're being political, and I'm like, this predates any of our politics by millennia. Like, but you know, there are going to always be people who are pre-offended. They're offended before we have a chance to offend them. I saw Jim said he's taken off. I think he's already gone. All right, we're almost done, and we're almost out of time. I wanted to just know, and we've talked about this a little bit, but just what are you carrying? What, if there's anything that has not yet been lifted up, I invite you to say. you know, what are you carrying? Are you feeling grief in your congregations or in your communities? Are you personally, like Elizabeth shared, saying things in to your family, your significant other, of where are we going to go? What are we going to do?
I think one of the things we carry is what other people carry too, right? You feel the communal, or if it's grief, anxiousness, fear. So it's not just your own, but others.
Yep, absolutely. So, you know, so my husband is from Scotland, and we live in Florida, and I really wanted to move to Scotland. He doesn't really want to go back there, but you know, Florida's rough. So one of the things that I'm carrying is just, at first it was, where can we go, and a sense of wanting to leave, but now I'm more carrying a sense of obligation to stay, and because Florida needs people like me, and more than I need to escape. And that's saying something as a trans person living in this place. So, you know, but partly that makes it easier for me. That makes sense, because it's a mission. So we don't have a lot of time to talk about our election toolkit, but some of the things that I recommend is finding those nonpartisan resources that you can give to people if they're confused on what's on the ballot in your local area. Again, I lifted up the League of Women Voters. They're really helpful. Here in Florida, we have Equality Florida. In your states, I'm sure there's similar organizations that where you can get some clarity. Again, being careful about what you promote, if it's in a partisan way, but at least being able to point people in the right direction. So when someone comes to you, and there's also a difference in what you say in a sermon versus what you say one-on-one to congregants, right? So if someone comes to you and says, I'm really confused about all these things that are on the ballot, you can, instead of saying, here's my opinion about it, you can say, here's the access to some resources that might be able to help. Anyone else have anything that's your go-to at election time to share with people? All right, and this is the end. What do you need? That's my last question for you. What does your spirit need? What does your heart need? What do you need right now? What's your, as Daniel said, prayer intention?
For me, it's maintaining hope and doing so in community, whether that's family or church community that I go to, here at school, you know, just maintaining hope and doing something, which is why I'm canvassing back where I grew up for a week.
Maintaining hope and an open mind, because it's very easy to close off with my own viewpoints and not hear why someone has a viewpoint that is different than mine and what that means, which then closes off all possible conversation.
Mm-hmm. I need, well, and I have good colleagues and other people who do similar work. You know, a few of us in this group today are in a weekly pastor, we call it a lectionary discussion group, but it's a sin to lie. we don't talk about lectionary a lot. It's mostly support and processing, and we workshop our sermons together and often preach on the same topics. But I think we abandoned lectionary a long time ago. Mostly just talk about what we need. And Steve, who's on this Zoom call, is another person who's here in the Tampa Bay area. So you know, we have a nice alliance with each other to give kind of the care that, you know, comes with being a queer pastor in Florida. And yeah, for me, that's what I most need is people, and what I'm happy to have. And that pastors group came out of the pandemic. We started meeting once a week during the pandemic, and it's continued for the last 4 years.
I think
And
one of the
somehow,
things,
oh, go ahead.
Bernie had said about, you know, about hope, and I think for me that was one of the things when you said, what do I need, is like a repository of hope that I can pull from. And I think that, you know, this is my first time as a parish minister in a presidential election cycle. This is all new for me. So not new for me in regards to presidential cycle. I've definitely been involved with that, you know, in for many years, but that part is a very different thing. And so I'm glad I was able to come here today to kind of to hear a little bit about this, and also share the link that Bernie had shared about the upcoming other workshops. I posted it on my church's Facebook page, so folks, and I'll add it to my newsletter for folks, more specifically the ones that are coming up. And I think that that's, you know, one of the things I put on our bulletin is also is to register to vote. There's still time to register to vote for folks. I mean, so these are some things that I can do. And also the information I got from today, sharing it with them, League of Women Voters, is really good, because that's a non-partisan one, as opposed to some of the political committees in San Francisco are very much aligned with Democratic tickets, and I don't want to do that specifically, because that could cause some challenges for some folks, at least the legal stuff anyways. But yeah, I learned from Jim Matulski is don't say their name. That's a good way of getting away around not being blatant about it.
Yeah. Well, thank you all for taking the time to come be part of this. We have a couple more of these Queering the Vote workshops in our series, and a bunch of other CLGS stuff that I think Bernie's going to share.
Yeah, thank you, Jacob. Thank you, everyone, for being here. Thanks, Daniel, for posting it on your church materials. So the next one in this series coming up is Love is Louder. So this is the second of two of the United Church of Christ's programs during campaign season from their Office of Public Policy and Advocacy. So that'll be in a couple of weeks. And then we have a workshop for a Sacred Response, which is a reflection retreat moment for an hour. And then our final one, Professor McMahon was on this Zoom for a while. Maybe you're still there, Leonard. I don't know. But then there'll be something after the election about living together in our post-election world. And then next week, just to let you know that we have our, if I can pull it up, our second in a series of Latinx roundtables. So this will be not Mi Casa, but Mi Casa es Tu Casa, Queer Latinx Reflections on the Family, with two theologians from the Latinx world. So thank you very much, Jacob.
All right, thank you, everybody.
And everybody for being here. Come back.
Come see us again.
Bye-bye.
All right, bye, everyone.
Bye.